Wow. If I do say myself, this has got to be the first motherfucking time that I've been coincidentally somewhat on time to any event that I host. And my name is Didi Delgado. This is the motherfucking full set, episode number 34. And I'm here with my esteemed colleague, Janaya Khan, also known as, to me, to everybody, Future. Future, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, wow. And so this is going to be your meter for the rest of the evening because this is who you are in your entire life. And so there is that. Welcome. How you feeling today?
Well, this is why I have to turn it on. I have to tell you, it is a mix of things.
Tell me what the mix of things is.
There was a time a few years ago, this is 7 years since Black Lives Matter. We could find a think piece. There could be a think piece or an article or a particular tweet or post or whatever that could properly capture exactly what you were feeling. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, you understood that you weren't alone, and that was at a time, I think, where we were shaping and informing the discourse. And we've done that. We've done that as much as any population of people could do that.
Right.
We have shaped the political discourse. We've shaped the cultural discourse, all the way, from, T-shirts on the street to Congress. There are no string of words that one can put together. You asked me how I feel. This is how I feel. There's no string of words that can be put together, no matter how beautifully, no profoundly, that means more to me than a beating heart. That means more to me than the breath in a body. That is more to me than a soul. And that is the attack. That is what anti-Black racism is attacking in us. And I find myself feeling very much like I did in 2014, and in 2015, and in 2016, and in 2017. But then, at least we had a place, a home to put our rage and our frustration, and we did that in our organizing. We are undoubtedly and inarguably one of the most influential movements of our time. And to still be in this place as we are, to know that we risked life and limb, and that we're here. And in 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, the only time that you hear all lives matter, despite the fact that this government has allowed for the culling of 100,000 people in this country, the culling of the population. Here we are, and all lives matter only trends when Black people are murdered by police or the equivalent. And so I believe that we're at a point right now where white people need to decide who they are, because we decided. See, everyone is given a story about themselves. Everybody in this country, everybody in North America, everybody in the West, everybody in the world. But right here, we're all given a story about ourselves. Black people are given a story about ourselves. Black women are given a story about ourselves. Native people, trans people, the story is one of worthlessness, one where you have to work 3 times as hard to get a quarter as much.
Right. The Black tax.
Right. And, we get told this over and over and over. We get told the story. And the story was, for us, that our lives did not matter as much. And to veer off that story was the path to destruction. We recognized that path that was laid out for us was to destruction. And so we had to write our own stories. The same thing with Native people,
right,
who inarguably are living in a post-apocalyptic world right here in North America. They had to write themselves into existence. They had to make their own stories that was outside of the colonial imagination. The problem is that white people do not yet see that they too have to rewrite their story, because if you do not, you have become effectively so removed from your own humanity that you have become an agent to an entity that is not you, that you have to decide whether you are going to take responsibility of living your full life, because that is where we are right now. And that's where my mind is at.
That shit is powerful as fuck. I mean, I feel like you really reframed something for me because I did not know the answer to my own question.
Mm-hmm.
And for you to come on the show and just be like, I've seen it before. I'm like, I felt like, am I allowed to say that? You know,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm fundraising for other things and then white women jump in my inbox and tell me, oh, well, you have to excuse me. I didn't see this ask. I'm fundraising because a Black man was murdered. I really feel like there's this rage in me that was like, and bitch, what else is new? Like, you understand what I'm saying? And I'm like, I feel like so not, I won't say desensitized because I was on a call today and just bursted out in tears, a professional job call and just burst out in tears.
Yeah.
But I do feel like there's this heightened momentum and this desire for Black folks to respond in a certain way. And I think that you're absolutely right that we have been here before. Many a time, several times a year, several times a month. So thank you for that reframing. I think that that was super important. I appreciate you. Yeah. I wanted to ask you what, I mean, I was going to ask you some other shit, but I might as well just talk to you. So what is the precipice for how we should move in this moment? Knowing that we feel, if we're not monolithic, we feel a range of things, right? Some of us are ready for the revolution. Some of us have already been like, well, we've been in the revolution. We're just waiting for y'all niggas to join. And some of us are just like, I'm focusing on this initiative. I'm doing this, you know what I'm saying? Because that's what's going to get us through when the momentum is gone, when niggas stop sharing shit from 2017. It did make me really sad that I got quoted today from an article from 2017 about what white people should do right now.
That's right.
So what would you say is the way for removing white people out of the equation? What would you say is the way for folks to move? And when I say folks, I know that you and I are talking and I could really quickly be like, oh, QT, BIPOC, da, da, da. But something you taught me is we can't forget the hoteps. That's something you taught me. And I always sit with that. You was like, we can't forget them. Because at one point that was an entryway into our shit. Like, you know what I'm saying? Where we're at now. And I think about that. If we say all Black Lives Matter, sometimes we want to leave some of them behind. Mm-hmm. But what do you think is the pivot point for us now in this moment, in this tenseness, in this sorrow?
I think that's a very there's a part of me that wants to answer in a way that says, you know, Black people need to do this and white people need to do this. But I understand, and I think Black people, for the most part, out of necessity, have come to understand that there is something very wrong in the way that this country is organized, and not just that it's morally corrupt, but that it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That it's wrong. That the things that we're paying into, we're not seeing returns on. You know, and that goes from Western morality to the support that we can expect to receive during a pandemic. You know, and so this moment has been so revealing. I mean, billionaires have made billions off of this. We have seen white people, bigots, narrow-minded people take up assault rifles and weapons and march onto the steps of multiple states, and, right up to their senators. And there have been lines of police officers who stand patiently. And, you know, we have seen Black folks in Minneapolis, just like we were in 2017 when I went out there for Jamar Clark after the organizers there had set up an occupation. We've seen that sort of double standard. And I think the next step is understanding that even the age-old tenets of meritocracy no longer hold in this America. The meritocracy of if you work hard and if you are this kind of person, you're worthy of this kind of
You better
respect.
talk about it.
But tell that to our doctors, tell that to the nurses that are as equally, as easily sacrificial lambs as any of us.
Mm-hmm.
It is all about oligarchs and the way that race can fuel it. And this isn't about race versus class. We need to be at the point where we're understanding racial capital, which is how this country came to be to begin with, and understanding that in the eyes of the oligarchs, you are no better than me. And so this thin layer of superiority that you've spent your whole life investing in, whether you knew it or not, is not going to save you or protect you. And so the bailout that we so desperately need, we see the police issue as a Black issue, but the bailout that we so desperately need, every person in this country, working class people, people who are busting their humps to feed their children, keep their grandparents and their mothers and fathers safe, that bailout that we need is in the budgets of police officers, in the massive and overinflated budgets of the police officers. For every politician that says, we just can't get the money, of course you can. It is there. And that is what we have been saying from the beginning. And now in a moment when we are all being leveled, however unequally, and we are being leveled unequally, if not now, if the understanding still is that we are putting property over people, then I'm telling you the revolution that we have will be the revolution that we deserve, Black people. It will be the one that we deserve. We will be the ones to fight. But, to say that we can transform America on its own, I don't know. But I know that the revolution that I'm talking about is a revolution of the spirit. We are fully aligned in our purpose, in our value, in our thoughts. Isn't that why we're here on the planet? To find out who the hell we are? To leave our mark? And so there's a blueprint. There are answers. It's all there. It's what we've been talking about all these years. And whether or not people who identify as moderates and progressives are able to see it, that's on them. But I would much rather live in the fullness of my life, even if it is a fight, because I would rather feel all of my feelings and love as deeply as I could love everyone in my life and see the world as it is and not as I was told it was. So that when I perish with such clarity, having lived such a full life, that it was worth something, that it meant something, that it meant something to other people. There is no other reason why we're here.
How did you arrive at this spirituality? I remember I don't know what year it was. I don't know. You and I would say allegedly was visiting some friends in Washington, D.C. Allegedly. And for some reason, I don't know why you grabbed me, but you were like, come on, we're about to do this interview. I was like, I didn't come here for interviews. And Democracy Now! Pulled a soundbite from both you and I, and we were discussing why protest is so important. It's 2020. And niggas still got a problem with protests. They don't have a problem with protesting when it suits them. They want to do the PTA and the bake sales and demand that nut-free products and baked goods be in their children's schools. They want to demand to return to work during the midst of a global pandemic to continue to spread the coronavirus. They know how to protest, but when Black people protest, it's a problem. And so when you say that we're here again, I think of Minneapolis burning right now. I don't know if it was Derica or Brittany, but they were like, it reminded them of 2015. It reminded them of St. Louis. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you think that how far from the mark of me saying our narrative is our humanity? How far from the mark are we? Because I hear you saying this and I was like, wow, Future is on that Afrofuturism shit. And like, how are we close?
You know, I use a lot. I used to use a lot of rhetorical force. I used to use a lot of the tools, you know, that we've created for ourselves and each other, and I think that's really important. The understanding of the socioeconomic and political conditions that we live under, or another way of saying it, the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, Christian heteropatriarchy.
All right now.
You know, and that is incredibly important. We need to have a language to explain and to understand what it is that's around us. But two, I have been very concerned and interested in the innate, like the way that morality has shaped this country, the way that certain philosophies have shaped this country, the presumption of innocence of white people, the presumption of guilt in Black people, and how much that shapes every single thing that we know. And I realized ultimately that every single thing that makes me who I am, everything that I know, is because of other people. Is because of the people around me, the people who love me, the people who have struggled to love me, the people that I have met. And if I am everything that I am because of the people that I know, who are white people who never have to interact with us at all? Who are the Black people who never interact with us at all? And I realized that, Wes, we were talking about systems of hate and bigotry, but what we were dealing with too was contempt. And contempt is a very specific thing. And, you know, there have been so many times where I have seen this contempt show itself again and again and again. I realized that is the education of whiteness. That isn't, now that isn't because white people own the keys to the kingdom on it. It's like they have a specific mastery of it because, of course, that's what power does. Right. But we're all contemptuous, and we all show it in different ways. I mean, we have seen our own communities be contemptuous of, equally contemptuous as much as anyone else, of queer and trans people. We are, as a society, contemptuous of the disabled and the neurodiverse, contemptuous of fat people. We are a contemptuous society. It's just that people like you and I,
people like us,
could only ever go so far. And I'll tell you why. We have studied everyone in the society by we didn't have a choice. I am an expert on whiteness. I am an expert on masculinity and maleness. I had to be. Point to me the woman that cannot read a man's body language more than she could likely read her own, because her survival was based on understanding the shifts in tone, the way the eyes go flat, all these things. And in the same way, we have become experts on whiteness, and it made it so that our contempt was always curbed and is always curbed by an understanding that that is a person. That is a person there. Our studying has made it so that, because we have never given ourselves over to the entity that we live in, to this white supremacist ideology. We never have. We couldn't. There's no space there for us. And so by virtue of our survival, which made it so that we had to study this thing, we understand it as human beings that are doing the most unjust things. Human beings that have given their lives and their selves over, their minds over, to an entity because it serves their body, even though it decays their mind. And so I realized that the education that we were experiencing was totally different. It isn't that white people, for example, don't know that racism exists. It is that they have been educated on race in such specific ways. Look at Amy Cooper.
I knew you were going to say something.
Amy Cooper, the Canadian woman. Canadian
people are hella racist. Go ahead.
Yeah, called the police on Christian Cooper, who was bird watching in the Ramble in Central Park. Now, yes, you know that I'm from Canada, and I could tell you all day about the myth of the racial haven that exists there. You know, I think people think that somehow anti-Black racism or racism stops at the 49th parallel. It doesn't. It really is just a disparity on population and investment in myth making that has led us to this place. But white woman from Canada, lives in New York. It could be argued that she would have progressive policies, progressive understandings of the world, because arguably that is what a lot of Canadians and from metropolitan areas are led to believe. That's what we're told.
Right.
People in New York tend to have more progressive politics. But she fell back on something. She fell back on a narrative that was far more familiar.
I was about to say familiarity. It was screaming in my ears.
Secure, in a moment where it wasn't that she felt, the threatened that she felt was not of her life. It was of her entitlement. It was of her power. And so she fell back on an age-old practice. And I know that is something that they do again and again and again. And I know that's something that we all do, but we all don't do it with devastating consequences. You know, and so I think then that I started to look at this from moving back a little bit further from where I was so that I could get more perspective. And I could get as fundamental as possible. And I really do think, I see it, that when you become an unthinking agent of an entity, you stop growing, you stop developing. That leads to things like fragility. That leads to tantrums like we've seen a lot of white people throw for not being able to get a haircut or not being able to walk into a store. And when you look at it from that place, that this is a person that stopped growing, and you realize that the same things that exist in them exist in us, and that we ended up in fundamentally different places, not just in society, but inside.
Right.
I have come across many, I mean, look, whether it was Charlotte or Minneapolis or Boston, we have come across folks all across race and age and gender who have been contemptuous or foolish in their beliefs, but they, again, cannot enact it out with such devastating consequences. And no matter what, how far they can go, how far we can believe that white people are monsters. And I say that understanding that the system is monstrous. I would love to say that I despise these people. I would.
Right.
But it would mean that I would no longer see their humanity. I can't turn it off. There is something in me where I cannot turn it off, because it would be a refusal of reality. A refusal of reality. And the problem is that white people have rejected reality a long time ago. You cannot see the world as you've been led to believe it is. At some point, you have to see the world as it is and your place in it. And that is the only way. That is the only way that you can hold the burden of your life. That is the only way that you will love as fully as you deserve to love, to mourn as fully as you mourn. I mean, there is a reason why we grieve Black people as deeply as we do.
Right. A lot of people have been saying that they feel like they're grieving their own family member.
That's right. It is because we understand the weight of every breath stolen and of every breath taken. We understand that our love had to be bigger than the hate in the world for us. There is nothing that can be done that would stop us from seeing the humanity that exists within us and that exists in the world.
Right.
And it has become, as a result, our responsibility to show white people the way. No. We live in alignment with what we know to be true. We live in alignment with a purpose here, while we're here in our lives, and we set the path. People must decide whether they're going to walk it with us. But there are no more instructionals. There are no books. no articles, no think pieces, no poems that can teach you how to love other people, that can teach you how to see the humanity in another person. That's a decision that you have to make. You have to decide to reject the education that you received about me. Stop denying yourself the pleasure of my existence. And choose to live life on your own terms. That is what we did. We stopped living the life that was set out for us. We started living the life that we wanted. And all this is, and all Black Lives Matter is, all this has ever been was an invitation to do the same.
There's some comments, a lot of people are giving you some clapping. So, I mean, you got some fans. There are some comments from fellow Black Canadians in the comments section.
Yes.
And they're wanting to know, like, being that some parts of Canada are so isolated, and I hope I'm not asking the question wrong, I'm paraphrasing, being that some parts of Canada are so isolated, the organizing in Canada looks totally different from stateside, as per these individuals. My question to you is, why BLM Toronto, right? And like, how is Canada connected to America outside of the diasporic Blackness? How are we merging? I don't want to say merging. How are we unifying our intent, which is the invitation to be free, as per your statement?
Yes, there is much to be learned. There is much to be learned about Black people, about how Black people exist and organize in Canada. There is. We do not have, in the same way, a national identity. Sometimes that can be challenging, but what it means is that we are not more committed to nation state than we are to each other. We understand there's a narrative and a practice in Canada around Indigenous sovereignty. And I understand that sometimes it is more words than actions, but it's there. And in Canada, we've had to focus more on critical connections versus critical mass. Now, I was from Toronto. That is where I grew up. That is where I first began organizing. And we have a mirror legacy to the United States. And I think that Canada has very, very quickly leaped at the opportunity to rewrite that story. And I think the magnitude, the sheer size of America's narrative of Canada was so overwhelming that it helped to set the course. So people think people ran north to freedom. You ran to Canada to freedom. That was with the Underground Railroad. The thing is, It was all about borders. The railroad went both ways. If you were an enslaved Black person in Canada, and we existed, enslaved Black people in Canada, you went south to freedom. Now, it just so happened that the population disparity made it so that far more people were going north than were going south.
Right, okay.
But the Underground Railroad went both ways. And there was and is descendants of slaves, enslaved people, enslaved African people on the east coast of Canada in Halifax. And it would be very difficult for you to locate exactly geographically where they were, because Canada destroyed the community, the free town, free settlement that existed there, and put a dump on one side, and they split it by putting a railroad in another. Now you can find a monument where Africville once stood. I could go through the history of the computer riots in the 60s, or right here in LA, where I am, where the Rodney King riots paralleled the Yonge Street riots in Toronto. When Raymond Lawrence, young Black man, was shot and killed. He was shot twice in the chest by Toronto police days before the Black Action Defense Committee was going to put on a rally in support of people here in Los Angeles over the riots regarding Rodney King.
Right.
So there has always been a history and a connection. It's just that I think Black people in Canada have been really forced to be fully aware of what was happening in the United States, and the responsibility, I think, of being aware of what else was happening in the world was not a practice that was happening both ways. And
Do niggas have time to be aware of what's happening in the world? I mean, I'm not talking about
I'll
regular
tell you
black
something.
people. I'm
No,
talking
look,
about the niggas.
nah, look, I'll tell you something.
Tell me something.
I'll tell you
You
something.
know, I love talking to you. Just on the humble, I've always loved speaking with you.
You know, if you are a Black person in the West, you know every single thing that happens in the United States regarding Black people, partially because you have no choice. You see yourself as part of a global struggle because we are not wedded to nationhood. But also because the minute that you bring something up, whether it's you are a Black person in the UK or Europe, or a Black person in Australia, or a Black person in Canada, the minute that you bring up an injustice that exists there around anti-Black racism, the first thing that these Canadians will say, or anyone else, they'll say, it's not like this is the States. And so it builds in you a resentment and awareness, and you have to work through that. And so when I came here, I realized why the sheer magnitude of, and the immensity of the size of, I mean, I cannot keep up.
Right.
Being Black in America is like being an ambulance chaser.
Shit.
You know, the precarity of your life is something that is felt at all times. Now, this is not to say that I didn't experience it growing up in the streets of Toronto. Tell that to Andrew Loku, you know, or Jermaine Carby, you know, or Regis, who recently, a 28-year-old Black woman who was thrown off of the balcony of her apartment in front of her mother. There is a reason why we existed out there. At a point in time, if you were a Black person on the streets of Toronto, you are more likely to be carded, which is the equivalent of stop and frisk. You are more likely to be carded on the streets of Toronto than you were stopped and frisked on the streets of New York as a Black person. There was a time. We put a stop to that. And so the narratives of this place being better or less dramatic, I mean, it is all relative to population. The entire country, the entire population of Canada are on a landmass that is 1.1% larger than the United States. The entire population of Canada could fit into California. It is less than the state of California.
Right.
And so Black people make up a very small percentage of the population, but we make up an astronomical, like where we are in the Canadian federal prison system. The numbers are astronomical. If you were to take those numbers and compare it to the States, it doesn't make any sense to do so. And so I think we need a rewriting of the narrative. But in terms of the question itself, in Canada, we really focused on critical connections versus critical mass. If you were outside of Toronto, it was far more difficult to get thousands of people on the streets.
I think this person may be in Quebec. I'm not really certain.
Yes, yeah. And so, you know, we had a brilliant media strategy. We focused on national implications and national organizing. So there would be echoes of the work that we were doing in Toronto, in the greater Toronto area, and then, you know, from coast to coast. And so when we were audacious enough to address pride, you know, and to take the teachings of Black Lives Matter and push pride back to its roots, because there were, I believe, 12 to 17 police floats in the Pride Parade in Toronto.
I remember this.
We stopped that, and then you saw that the impact was felt on the east coast of Canada, to the west coast of Canada.
I remember this.
And we saw echoes, right, of it through the States, where Black Lives Matter was pushing pride because we could not assimilate into whiteness the way that white gay men could. Right. We could not disappear ourselves to be palatable in our queerness and in our Blackness. It was not possible. And so those were some of the strategies that we did. We really focused on building connections locally, and created a drumbeat instead of the thunder that one could hope for in the beginning. And we really focused on building connections with people on a national scale, even if it was 1 or 2 or 3 people who were also interested in doing that work. It is far harder work, but is worthwhile work. And, you know, again, I had to be here in the States to really understand what it felt like, what it looked like to organize here, and to understand the narrative here. And I do believe, and I will always know, And I think a lot of Black Americans know that this struggle is a global struggle. And I'm seeing many, many people speak to anti-Black racism in Canada in a way that was not possible before Black Lives Matter, because we were and are a global movement.
Thank you for that. What advice, if any, do you have for, this is a bilateral question, so what advice, if any, do you have for youth who are looking to get into activism? And I'm gonna clarify the word activism in a second, as according to you, Future. But what does it look like for youth to get involved in Canada versus youth in America to get involved in activism? And I'm only talking about North America for right now, so.
Yeah, look, like, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever the hell you want. That is, listen, I can tell you how to do a campaign. Okay, I could tell you to have a specific goal, a strategic target, and a plan to continuously put pressure on it. But no, you don't need to know how to do a campaign. You can figure that out. There are lots of articles, and I think that the greatest task of young people today is believing, one, we are in a digital and technological revolution, and the way that surveillance technology works is unbelievable. It is like never before. And, I mean, Dee Dee, you already know, Black identity.
I don't know shit.
Yeah, just a report that was leaked, but with the realities of things like Black identity extremism, there are ways that we're all being surveilled. And that's any Black person that has anything to say about anything, because they were so unclear in what Black identity extremism could be. And so I think that the work of the next
it was a very broad stroke.
It was very broad. I'm like, is it the cookout? Is it a church that has a 60% Black population?
Is it the cookout? I don't know.
So I think that young people have a very difficult thing, because this is a time where the seduction of influencer culture is very, very present, where it's about being a voice box, but not doing the work of organizing. And I think the hard part for a lot of young people will be, or if not this generation, then certainly the next, is that this future of activism is anonymous. It must be. It must be. Because of the way that surveillance is going to work. And so I'll tell you this, strike a balance, because the seductiveness of influencer culture, the more polarizing you are, the more popular you are. And you have to figure out if that's the kind of work you want to do. When I say polarizing, I don't mean not telling the truth. I mean, tell the truth, absolutely. But don't be so stuck in the modalities of critique that you aren't offering people solutions. It is one thing to say, this is fucked up and that person's fucked up, but an activist, the job of the organizer is to steer momentum where it needs to be, right? So we cannot be so locked in the modalities of critique that we are not offering our people something.
Because niggas love to critique, but I don't know if they doing.
Right. So I think that's one. And then, that's a big one, is not falling into the trap of just, saying what's popular. I mean, Black Lives Matter was not popular until like a month ago. A lie? It really wasn't.
No, you're not lying. You're not lying.
We were pariahs. We weren't invited to anything.
I was just about to say, there were things that I had normally spoken at because of my connections with the NAACP. Them niggas was like, you BLM? You're a terrorist organization. What do you say to that? It's been so long. I've asked folks to identify one terrorist act. I can't, and I won't. But I just feel like something you had said, you always talk about narratives, and I think that that's why you're one of my favorite people. Something you had said was the popular narratives that we see around Blackness and the way we come to understand ourselves are informed by stereotypes, anti-Black racism, misogyny, over-sexualizing, and a myriad of other things. What is the most powerful antidote to that, do you think?
The most powerful...
Don't say love. I'm gonna throw up if you say love.
The most powerful antidote to Tell me.
Yes, this is your words, not mine.
Yes.
That the narratives, how we see Blackness and without the way we understand ourselves is informed by stereotypes of ourselves, by anti-Black racism, even intra-community, right? Misogyny, over-sexualizing of each other, and a myriad of other things. I think of misogynoir. I think of transphobia. I think of I'm trans people can do whatever they want. It's not my life. Do whatever you want. But then you have the Breakfast Club who likes to make jokes at trans women expenses. You know what I'm saying? And then something you had also said was, I have met some of the most incredible people in my life in this work, but no one starts out as remarkable. We become remarkable when we fight for freedom, justice, and the liberation of people and the planet. So how do those two, you're like, that's right, I said that shit. So how do those two things either contend or complement one another?
Look.
Listen, I asked the questions.
Yeah, those are very, very old quotes. But when I should update my website. So.
I was like, do you have a bio? You're like, it's on the website. I'm like, all right.
Yeah, no, I haven't looked at that in a very long time, unfortunately. It's not my area of interest.
We gotta get you a person. We gotta get you a person.
Saying deep shit. No, no. Look, you know, we all are, our entire society and ourselves we are shaped and organized around binaries.
Right.
Good and evil, right and wrong, black and white, straight, gay, rich and poor. And I think, I've spent a long time wondering what it was that made trans people so threatening. I myself am a non-binary person because I'm too cute for two genders. But I have wondered what it was that was so very threatening about someone saying, these are my pronouns. And I finally figured it out, Dee. I figured it out.
What is that?
It's because when we challenge one of the binaries that people have taken as immutable truths, we are in fact challenging all the binaries that are being taken as immutable truths. And I think the other side of that is, I think there's something really offensive. I think we're really offended when someone is living in their own truth. They have the audacity to be powerful when they shouldn't. Oh, that is offensive.
Is this escapism or freedom?
Yeah, this is terribly offensive.
Right.
And I think that we are a mix of contradictions, because that is what can come. The only thing that can come of living in a society like this.
Right.
But at some point, you have to grow more and more aligned. I was a mix of contradictions. I still am. I know that I am light-skinned and annoying. Like, we're annoying as a population of people.
I'm super annoying.
We are very annoying as a population of people. In our palatableness. And so we have to push the envelope even more.
Right.
And I think about things like the Breakfast Club. And the truth is, we are drawn to when people say something that feels the most consistent or the closest to our own personal truths. We're drawn to that. And so what we do, what our job is as organizers, there's my job where I have personal power. I worked my ass off to get it. All right.
Right.
I used to think that I was nothing. That's what I got told my whole life. But I've worked around personal power, but that doesn't mean that that's reflected in political power. Right. And if we learned anything around Blackness, we could, as every population of people pilfers from our culture, or even with the latest, rush of Black trans women that we see in the media, cultural presence doesn't equal political power. The conditions for us hasn't actually changed. And so we have to live in our truths, and we have to push forward the agenda of what that truth is. And I know people call it the gay agenda, and I think that's so funny.
What's the agenda? What's the agenda?
Yeah, they'll be like, it's the gay agenda, but I'm just like, listen, this is the funny thing. You are an agent of it and you don't even know it. You are an agent of an agenda that doesn't think that you're anything other than a pawn.
Mm.
And that's all of us when we're just being maneuvered unthinkingly. You know, but I will not hold Black people, even problematic Black, I will not hold Black people more accountable for the injustices that exist in our system, no matter how close the betrayal feels. I will never hold them more accountable.
Somebody better write that fucking down. Can you say that one more time, please?
Yeah, I will never hold Black people more accountable for the injustices that exist in our world, in our society, than I will anyone else, or than I will the system that has created it. I am going to look at the person, and I'm going to look at the socioeconomic and political conditions that informed what that person knows and how they see the world. And if I am not doing the work of both, I am not doing the work at all. I am just condemning a person to you know, and people can choose ignorance. They can choose it, Dee. They really can. But here's what I know. I'll tell you a lesson that I learned.
I'm ready for this lesson. Y'all listening?
You ready?
Mm-hmm.
I used my first human rights job. It was the most annoying thing in the world. I was in Canada. And it was for a human rights organization, a human rights organization. That's what they called themselves. It was around LGBTQ inclusion. And we would go all around Canada, which is an overwhelmingly white country.
Right.
That was overwhelmingly Native and Indigenous, and is still Native and Indigenous territory. And I would go and we'd have to do these safer space trainings.
Right.
And all of my coworkers were white, and they were fantastic. We had our bumps in the road, and they were great. They figured it out. We would go to these places together in these mandatory trainings, and I would be in the room largely with middle-aged white people. And they couldn't stand me. They wouldn't look at me. They wouldn't ask me questions about something that I had said. I'd be there for 3 hours. They would hardly make eye contact sometimes. And I got to a place where I was like, you know what? I'm good. I'm done.
Right.
Because I'm getting paid anyway. I don't need to do this anymore. They would call me aggressive or intimidating or, you know, whatever. And there's only
I can relate.
Yes, when my coworkers would rip up the you know, reviews, the evaluations that were clearly racist, but I had to make a decision for me.
Right.
The decision of, you know what, I'm just going to get paid or whatever. Let me tell you something. Never let anyone determine how much integrity you walk into a room with. I made myself smaller. I made my belief in the work that I was doing smaller because of the smallness of their minds. And when I figured that out, when I learned that that's what I was doing, I got right in alignment with my purpose and the work that I'm doing, and I invited them to do the same. If they didn't, that was on them. That was on them. And so that has followed me to this day. Nobody gets to decide what my integrity is, what level I walk into a room with. Everyone is going to get the same me, but not everyone is going to get it as long. I choose where I have bandwidth, and I choose where I have infinite bandwidth.
I was about to say, you were really consistent, motherfucker. I will say that about you. You're just very consistent, but I've noticed you got a short stack, and I wouldn't say in anger. I believe you when you say I choose how long I spend myself there. You know, I think about Boston in 2017. It was just such a hectic time. I don't remember. It was 4 days we had to organize. Mm-hmm. Very, very little time. Y'all niggas flew out from Nova Scotia, Appalachia, wherever the fuck you from. You understand what I'm saying? And y'all got on planes from all over the world, I felt like, you know, and came to little old Boston, Massachusetts. And I remember, I'm bringing this story up because not even one of my interns, one of my volunteers, her name is Sean, said, what advice, sorry, it wasn't Sean, it was Rachel. What advice, do's and don'ts do you have for navigating conflict in activism communities? And I want to bring up a story because I know you a motherfucking storyteller, and I won't go too deep into it, but there was a lot of a lot of people brought together in one place in order to organize the march that Monica and I had brought together, the counter protest, for white supremacy march. And you were there. I swear to God, you always give me Neo vibes. Like, the long black trench coat, the flip up black sunglasses. Them niggas probably didn't even flip up, and now I'm exaggerating. And you always have the headband on, And you came into the room. I remember we was at SEIU, and it was like 26 to 35 of us in the room. And we're all kind of organizing around each other. We're organizing in circles, and you just standing there in the corner, like the nigga from Lost Boys, whatever, foot on the wall, like, you know what I'm saying? And you're like, what are we doing here? And then there was a subsequent, there was a little conflict with you and another organizer. And I don't know if it was a long-standing conflict or it was just like let's dead this. We've been at this conversation all day. We got 2 more days. There was a subsequent follow-up meeting at my house, and everyone, I had a master bedroom, but every other 26 of y'all niggas was like cramped up in my room. And I remember you saying, I have a little bit of bandwidth for this conversation right now. Can we pick a person to lead logistics? And it was like there was a silence that had settled over the room, because it was like, wow, now we're being, that was the choice. That was the original question, right? But there was something about, I think, the way that you show up in spaces and you're like, let's recalibrate. You say it without many words, and I don't think you're rude about it. I just think that you're very certain in your understanding of what needs to happen next. And I think people don't know how to contend with that. Or I won't say contend, I'll say grapple. And so it was very quiet. And you were like, niggas might as well just go around the room one at a time, just say who you want to be the logistics coordinator, and we go from there. Mm-hmm. And I felt that transference of power, not just because everyone, with the exception of one person because they're a hater, everyone chose me to be the logistics coordinator. It was the fact that you did it like Salt Bay. Like, it was very romantic the way you did it. And so I would like to know the answer to that question. How do you navigate conflict, knowing that inherently we as human folk, but especially us, you said earlier in the show that sometimes the betrayal feels so close that you just want to lash out. How do you navigate conflict?
Yeah. I remember that day, and I remember everyone saying, we're going to continue this conversation at Dee Dee's. And I said, I'm going to the hotel. I will see you all tomorrow. So I think in navigating conflict, it is very important. And look, sometimes conflict is balanced between two people, but since the context was around organizer stuff, I'll tell you, you really need to know what level of emotional maturity the person that you're dealing with is at. You must, because that's going to assess how quickly or easily things can be resolved. Because I think we're all so raw in those moments that it is very difficult to respond proportionately to what's happening around you and what the actual conflict is, instead of conflating it. There's a lot of insecurities, a lot of fears, a lot of anxieties. And so you need to be able to quickly assess, how much does this make sense? And how much is this necessary? Because sometimes all people need is reassurance. They just need reassurance that you know that they're valuable, and that you know that they're smart, and that you're hoping that they see the same thing in you, which helps to level the field out a little bit. Now, that's in those very tense moments. If you have conflict with somebody, I think if there's anything that we have done that troubles me in movement communities, is that I've mentioned this before, but we become very stuck in the modalities of critique, where people feel that they have more to benefit from continued conflict than they do resolution. And
thank you. The show is over. I appreciate it.
Yes. And so, resolution is so incredibly important, and you really need to know if resolution is possible with the person with where they're at. That can look like a lot of things, having a third person come in as a witness, being able to speak in a way that best embodies accountability, which is acknowledgement, apology, amends, action. But
can more than one person be accountable in a conversation of conflict?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. You know, look,
Because there's a binary there, you know that,
there is,
right?
we have a victim abuser binary.
Well, I'm done here.
And you know, and it is you know, and I think when you look at power, it's very, you know, it's very likely, it's very true that somebody in a longer standing dynamic is one or the other. But I've also learned that the majority of relationships that I have known, the majority of people that I have met are both end. Their actions are both harmful, and their actions are, I should say, their actions are both harmful and they were the recipient of other harmful actions. Like I can look back in 2017 and you know, 2016, 2017, and I know that there were tweaks that I absolutely would have preferred to make in the way that I went into space, because when you have a lot of personal power, you also need to have a lot of personal responsibility with how you wield it. And I think sometimes I was impatient with ideas that I didn't think were as evolved as they needed to be. You know, and my job is to build people up, to build up their capacity to see themselves in the, you know, in the exact position that I am, even higher, you know. But I think we've taken for granted the language that we've created to help understand a system, and instead now leverage it against other people. And I don't know that we're ever going to get to a place where we can actually talk about people's abusive behaviors without losing them, unless we remove the stigma around abuse. I don't know how to do that. I'll be honest. I am not a healing person. I'm a theory person. You know, and I think it really is understanding the limitations of your leadership. I understand that that is not actually my scholarship.
Right.
I do know I can look at things and understand it theoretically, but there are people that are building entire bodies of work around it, whether it's Harriet's Apothecary or Pleasure.
Jairus Dixon or Mariam Makambe. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like there's so much, yes, right? Abolition. Abolition is
Right.
something that we understand, non-prison, non-punitive ways to deal with harm in our communities, and also on a state level, on a carceral level. And so, and it can be hard because all we have at this point, it feels like, is the language.
Right. It's the only thing we can control because it's the first time we feel informed enough to name how we've been harmed prior to activism.
Yes. You know,
I mean, what do I know?
I'll say that abolition culture to me is the only thing that I believe can work, which is understanding the world outside of binaries, understanding each other outside of binaries, understanding that that everyone, every single person in your life, in the movement, has just as much majesty, just as much depth, just as many contradictions and as many traumas as you do. And unless we are willing on the community level, I don't care about big wigs in Hollywood, but on the community level, if we're going to, I would love to see what a shift could be if we, instead of calling people like trans people and, you know, trans women, Black people, poor folks, you know, disabled folks, abusers, and toss them aside. Instead of doing that, I would love to see what it would look like if we got them therapy. Instead, if we invested in the transformation, and we, as you know, because we haven't even done that for people who are the victims of abuse. And so,
right.
you know,
We sure haven't got them therapy.
Yeah. So
they're navigating their own victimhood on their own.
Completely on their own, completely. And so I think that, and it can be hard because we're so resource strapped.
Right.
We need so little. And
right, which goes back to your statement. Yes, and like, yes, we haven't been able to do this, and it's because we're Black. And although we have a collective power, it can't be exercised because of white supremacy and all the things that Bell Hook names in the very long statement. And so I really appreciate you naming those things, because I always wonder, as someone as no, you don't like people to read your bio. So if y'all niggas want to know more about Future, read the bio on your own time. But this is also an exercise in employing the things that would be biographical anyways. I mean, we're sitting here talking to you. So my biggest thing is, I've always wanted to know, because I know you as a person that has always been very short with people. And I think that's why I identify like romantically in my head with you, because I was like, I live for this, you know. But you said something to me very interesting. You said that you had to examine the ways in which you felt as if something wasn't fleshed out or thought up, especially coming from someone you expected it from. Do you think that that might have been, and I'm asking for myself really, these are healing conversations for me as well. Do you think that that might have been some self-absorption, and then have you taken some time to reflect on ways you can show up better? Do you reach out to people and be like, hey, I'd like to connect with you in a meaningful way, you know, going forward? Or do you even mention what happened before? I don't know.
Well, the nature of sorrow is narcissistic, right? It is when you are hurting, it is very difficult to see beyond your own heart, especially if you've never been taught to do so. And so, you know, I think it was less self-absorption and more arrogance. I was arrogant in some of the spaces that I occupied in my leadership because I was growing increasingly, what's the word? Disappointed.
I was going to say dismissive, but you said disappointed. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, look what we did, you know, or people like us in Washington, what we may or may not have done, but
what we may or may not have done.
The point is,
right.
2016, I lost my patience because we broke, our movement broke. We could not agree on what to do around the Trump administration. And they're coming into power. We could not, we simply could not. And the answer to me and to, unfortunately, a lot of the leadership, myself and a lot of the leadership, we saw it the same way, which was whatever we needed to do to stop the consolidation of power across the right, we must do, even if that is Clinton. Now that wasn't the only strategy that we offered.
Right.
It was like, do everything else. We must do everything else. But no matter what, we must avoid the consolidation of power across the right, because that is what we are dealing with. And for a lot of, you know, and not, you know, and this is not, there's no way this is coincidence. A lot of the younger activists throughout the movement for Black Lives were opposed to that and called a lot of the leadership sellouts and this and that and the other. And I realized that even if you disagreed, which I feel like is totally fine, we should have disagreement in the, you know, in the movement. It wasn't principled. It was wild, and it was based off of 1 minute now this videos. And so, you know,
I feel personally attacked.
So there was a lack of political education.
I think that's what I would agree with you on. I wouldn't disagree with you about what you just said, but I would say is a lack of political education. And as one of those young activists, I felt like there could have been more. And then also I felt sad because I felt like y'all felt that we should be doing it on our own time, just like y'all did, you know, like it was just a lot to be in the midst, how we are now. That's why it feels so familiar, in the midst of a huge, super trauma, and then having to still fight for our humanity.
Yes, yeah. So
I'm not sure there's time to learn.
I know. I look back on that moment, that time though, a lot, because yeah, it was ugly. It was an ugly time for us. It was every time we got together in a space, it was disastrous, it felt like, because it just would descend into arguments, not debates. And so it was the lack of political education.
Thank you for being honest.
Yeah, and so I see myself in that. I see my impatience in that. And I think part of the arrogance came from the fact that I too came from nothing. You know, group home, foster home, women's shelter kid, you know, and in Canada, and I know that any Black person or activist, you know, who's from so-called Canada can attest to this. There is no infrastructure for activism. You cannot become a career organizer. Right. It doesn't exist. It is not possible. There are no awards. There's no celebrity. If you're an organizer, the closest you can ever come to celebrity status is if people in the communities you serve know you. You know, that you can maybe climb a little bit if you're a, you know, pseudo journalist or a journalist, but it's otherwise it's quite impossible to do so. And I think, you know, I had spent a great deal reading. I spent a great deal reading to understand my predicament, to understand my mother's predicament, to be a better advocate for her. And I applied what I learned to the work and the organizing that I did. And I shut my mouth when people were smarter than me or knew more than me in the rooms that I was in. And I expected that everyone should approach it and do it like I did. And looking at that, I understand the arrogance, that one must have to feel that way and to feel that we all learn the same way. I, as a person who myself was never a finisher, I didn't even finish my degree until a partner of mine was like, you need to finish it. You need one more credit. And I was like, it's a credit. I'm sticking it to the man, and she was like, this is ridiculous. So I have always been raised up by the people around me and by the communities around me. And, being this way in that space, I think the pressure has not worn off, but I have been able to get a little bit more breathing room in it.
Respite.
I've acclimatized to it a little bit, and I can see where shifts could have happened that I could have helped facilitate.
I don't want you. I mean, I appreciate you saying that, and I'm trying not to cry, so that's why that's the reason for the fan. But I feel like I don't want you to accept responsibility in that alone. And obviously, I cannot speak for the entire hood hop Jaquan fucking generation. You fucking love that song. I can't speak for the generation of us that came into organizing being told that we're butterflies and that we have astronomical amount of wings, like people were blowing smoke up our ass at that time. So I believe that was a bit of arrogance on our part too. And I can't believe that's the first time I'm saying that out loud, but I guess this is all a learning curve for us. And I think about those times when we were all in spaces. And I think about the unwillingness to bend of both parties. I remember that there was a conversation about, I won't say which chapter because it was yours, but that we do, all this accessibility shit and we have this and that. And niggas in Springfield was like, but we don't have $100 to our budget even, and then wait. And then here I am in the middle. I'm like, niggas, y'all ain't got $100. Like, what I'm saying? Like, it was very, and I love both of y'all, right? Like, what I'm saying? So it's very interesting the way the arrogance showed up everywhere. And so I appreciate you saying that, but I think that accountability in the bastardized way that we utilize it really needs to be a conversation sometimes in growth and being like, actually, this is where our wound met each other. And that's something Luana Morales tells me all the time. Where does it hurt? And where did y'all meet each other at there? Like, what I'm saying? And so I would apologize too, because I know that y'all always helped me, but y'all helped me when I was kicking and being like, and fuck y'all too. Like, what I'm saying? And so, and I think that it was felt from the leadership both ways. Like, what I'm saying? So I appreciate the times that we spent together because they themselves were the learning curve and not so much a training that I could have went to or some sort of curriculum I could have completed. That itself was a training because I know better. I know some things now. I don't know better because of y'all, but I know some things now. And I appreciate that time that we spent together. Such a long time we spent together. And that we could even be in community in this way.
Yeah. I think as organizers, what we should do every single time, anywhere we're going, first question we ask, how can I help? That's it. How can I help?
And also to not be resentful after we've offered the help. I think that's something I've done. I think it's something I clearly see other organizers do. And do you know, after all we did for this family, or do you know, after all I did for this person, like, what I'm saying? It's like, we need to like check the ego that shows up there, that like shows up as devastated that there's not reciprocity during trauma. Like, what I'm saying? So I don't know, like niggas need to be grateful or something that Black Lives Matter swooped in and helped them for 5 minutes. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I did just eat the whole apple. It's true.
I was trying to ignore you and mind my business, but on that Zoom call I was talking about earlier, my ignorant ass ate a whole corn on the cob. So I'm not judging you. I was sitting spitting out seeds and kernels.
Yeah, Dee, time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I feel like this is none of the questions I had for you, but I feel like
that's good.
They made 8 questions for me and I've used 2 of them, My last question for you is like something that was on my heart, but I won't ask it. So I'll say my last question to you is, what does love look like for Black trans folk? And when I say trans folk, I mean like anyone who is interested in exploring the freedom that the gender binary never gave us. And when I think about the ways in which you show up, and you and Ashley Shackelford and Elle and Aaron Lang and all these individuals have shown up individually and collectively to the conversation and have paved ways for folks not to be afraid anymore, for folks to like actually reach for that bout of freedom, even if it's just a pocket for right now. Like, is there love for us? You know what I'm saying? Like, is there like, I mean, I know your ass is in love, and you know, you're all who you are, but is it love for the rest of us? And the second part of that is there anything that I didn't ask you that you're like, this bitch is mad suspect? I definitely thought we was gonna talk about this. And then who would you like to see on the show?
I'll answer the shorter questions first.
Okay.
I'll circle back to who I would like to see. I will say that even if you didn't ask me the questions I wanted to be asked, I'm long-winded and I'll always answer the question that I want. So no need to worry there. The conversation we had between each other was great. And love, you know, I think that, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, the kind of love that I want for us, the kind of love that we deserve, is one informed by strength. But the strength should not be determined by how much oppression we can endure. Mm. It should be by something else. You know, it should be by how much we can fill ourselves up with love, that kind of strength, how far we can stretch for each other, not how far we can stretch to survive. And so that is the world that I am fighting for. That is the world that I want us to build. And that is the world that I believe in, even when I don't. I have no choice, you know?
Thank you. Who wants to be on a fucking show?
You know, I don't, you know, I don't like anyone.
Say, I think this is why we just be talking shit in the back of the room all the time. I want to give a shout out to Vita Ia Cleveland. Thank you so much for joining. I always look forward to your posts. Thank you.
We have so many smart people. I'm not, you know, I'm either smart or I'm not. So there's so many smart people for you to choose from, but I've enjoyed who you've had on.
Oh, you watch the show?
Everybody's brilliant on occasion, you know.
On occasion. All right.
On occasion, I try to stay off social media. I think that's why I got so deep. Is because I just spend.
I was here for it.
Myself, but you know, I'm writing something, Didi.
What are you writing? What are these new projects? I love when you throw stuff my way. You haven't done that in a long time.
Yeah, I'm writing for myself for the first time, and some of the things that I've named are going to be in the work. So hopefully it's something useful.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Future, for appearing on this episode of The Full Set. I appreciate you. I see you in your fullness. I've always seen you in your fullness, even when I didn't want to. Thank you and your wife for your hospitality. And I appreciate you joining me today. So thank you so much. I hope that you have a good night. And this has been another episode of The Full Set.
All right, back.
Peace.